If you're familiar with the IoT Show, you are an IoT practitioner, you know how complex it can be to unify data at the edge, especially in manufacturing. You have so many older machines that are producing various types of data in different formats. You want to make sense of all this data, you want to unify it, you want to normalize it, you also want to put it in context. All of that is not trivial at all. Alexander Krüger is a co-founder of a company called U-MAGE based in Germany, who is providing an industrial data management platform. So you know the thing or two about data management at the edge, especially in manufacturing. Today we'll talk about ISA-95, we'll talk about UNS, many interesting topics that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. So if you enjoyed this show, once again, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. All of that helps us. Tell us what you think. Hi everyone, this is the IoT Show. I'm Olivier, your host. Today we'll talk about industrial standards, I would say, or models, and we'll talk about UNS and ISA-95. And for that, we have Alexander. Alexander, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, definitely. Thanks for joining us. Where are you calling from?
From Cologne in Germany. So it's actually quite in the center of Germany, just a bit to the left. So near to the France border, if you want. So not near, but in the US scheme of things, it's quite close by.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's end of day for you. I'm on the West Coast here, so thanks a lot for taking the time. Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing in life?
So actually, by background, I'm a mechanical engineer. So in my spare time, when you can call it like that, as a founder, I try to go do as much sports as I can, and I really also love to program and expose myself to tech also in my free time. But you cannot call me coder. I was just mechanical engineer, so I left working rather with formulas and thermodynamics, and then I directly jump into system integration after my studies, mechanical engineering, and sidetracked into IT, which I'm still holding on to, if you want so, since a few years, which is quite a journey.
That's super interesting that you're coming from such a remote background, I would say, to what people usually come from, right? So they usually come from IT and they did software engineering and they start doing IoT and they start working in integrating stuff for manufacturing and other solutions like that. So it's pretty interesting you have this background. I always say that in an IoT team, you need to have different kind of people with different backgrounds and cultures and knowledge to make it all work, right? Do you confirm that? You agree?
I think three things. IT, obviously, I think this is the base of everything. These are the technology providers. You need to understand OT, where I try to bring my share of mechanical engineering and process improvement, etc., to it. And the business is obviously the last perspective that you need to have in there, because IT doesn't understand what OT is doing. OT doesn't understand, just provocatively, don't understand cloud native stuff. And the business just wants to see value and doesn't care about technologies. And if you want to nail it, you nail all three.
Yep, definitely. So tell me, what are you doing in terms of company and work? And so we will talk about open source. We'll talk about UNS, ISA-95, and so on. But give us some context here.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was before U-MAGE. We had a system integrator, which was primarily a data plumber, if you want. So, we had platforms in the cloud or on the edge, and we had data sources also on premise, which were PLCs or an MES or some ERPs where we got data from to fuel OEE improvements, to fuel quality, to fuel predictive maintenance or whatever. And so then at some point we just did the same thing over and over again. Connecting, cleaning, pushing it to some application, but the tooling was quite inferior for that. So whatever you had at the time was not built for moving a lot of data fast, reliably, and also I would say has the ability to model it in a sense that OT needs to model data based on ISA-95 and has also structures in it. And this was then after 2.5 years or pivot, if you want, so to move from services to a software company, and U-MAGE's focus is actually to be that glue in between the OT landscape and the IT applications and provide data, vice versa. So to get get clean and uniform data from the heterogeneous zoo of automation and make it applicable and easy to use across various IT applications, and also move IT data back where it's then put into action in OT. And this is what we're roughly doing at U-MAGE.
Gotcha. So basically, no one was doing it good enough for you, so you decided to just do it. Just go and do it, right?
To do it and also make it applicable for the OT people out there. This is so complicated and needs to be usable, scalable, and we are.
Yeah. I think lots of people are hitting that wall, and would certainly benefit from your expertise and knowledge and services at the end of the day. So you decided to do everything in open source and work with the community, which is, I would say, like almost counterintuitive in this kind of industry. We're trying to, make money, and the perception is that open source is kind of like taking away some of your revenue or potential business models. But I do believe that's not the case. But some still believe that, especially in the domain that we are talking about, which is more, old ways or old-fashioned type of business. So why open source and why engaging with the community?
I think from the IT perspective, it was actually intuitive to do it like that. Open source is like you increase the cake, but slim down your slice. Yeah. So like a lot of users on the platform, we have also like a lot of users who we don't monetize. And I think the problem is so new and so diverse in between of who is using the system, which is problems are that we need to expose our sales and our product to as many people as possible in the shortest period of time possible. And this is why we said open source. And this is because it's the most radical way to do that. And in IT, it's standard. Yeah. Think about operating system. It's in an IT world, always open source. Think about container management. Think about databases. Like every piece of IT infrastructure that really scaled has an open source component or is fully an open source company. And it was just logical. If you want to build infrastructure, IT infrastructure also on OT side, you need to apply the playbook there and make it open source.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then we're talking about providing a sort of framework or layer or services and tools for unifying data coming from different sources and different formats and so on. And so engaging with the community on open source project helps bring different perspective, different needs onto the table, because you don't have the whole problem yourself and you need to solve a broader problem than the one you're facing yourself. And so engaging with the community definitely is necessary, actually.
Yeah, specifically in manufacturing. Yeah. So if you build like a consumer-facing app or like a SaaS application, which you can sell for $9.99 and then expose it to a large crowd of people at the same time, you get radically fast feedback because people can download it in 1 minute and can give you feedback in 3. In manufacturing, it's completely different. Yeah, you talk to users for months/years before they just provocatively long, but you talk a lot of time before you get feedback. So the only logical thing is have more of them to come to a head count and a company count that really gives meaningful feedback. And I would.
Yeah. So let me jump to the question about, we mentioned ISA-95, UNS a little bit. So what I would like for you to do is give us your definition or description of what is ISA-95 and what is UNS at a very high level, and tell us why you think that it's important to move, maybe not to move away, but to move towards UNS.
Yeah. What it is always, if you ask 10 people, you get 10 answers. But just to break it really down for us, ISA-95, when we talk about that here now, I'm referencing to the classical system architecture on the shop floor. Yeah? Having your level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5 systems communicating only to each other with the corresponding level above and below. And this is the way how you build software and data pipelines in manufacturing till date. And the UNS is also something that is still a bit vague. I would say it's not a consortium or already has defined what it is. But for us, it's an event-driven architecture. Not everybody agrees on that, but we believe it needs to be. And secondly, it also implies to the data model that makes it actually reusable across various applications. So combining, for example, ISA-95 to an event-driven architecture, and therefore having in that your unified namespace. Yeah. So this is roughly what we think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, because you just mentioned something, unless I didn't get it right, but you mentioned the notion of bringing ISA-95 onto
Yeah.
that PubSub model or message or eventing model. So
Yeah.
aren't they, or are they incompatible, or can they complement each other?
So it's not everything is bad that was there before. So ISA-95, in the sense of how to connect systems, was there because 20 years ago you could not, at a volume and throughput that you could do now, connect systems with each other. You need to downsample in between the layers. Yeah, so an ERP cannot just swallow all the process data that's coming in. This is different now. Yeah, you have highly scalable solutions on the software and hardware side. So there's not a necessity anymore to have this strict, in IT sense, a ETL process in between those layers. And yeah, so I think you can remove that, but you really want to have the structure still in place. Yeah, this enterprise side area line, which gives a good sense of positioning, which is like a huge problem when you scale something like in UNS, it gets messy. And you really want to put structures in place which avoid that. And the structure of ISA-95 is really, really good, well aged, and quite standardized, so that you can combine it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then I would assume that you were saying there's a lot of data that is pushed up, and data coming from the actual sensors, the actual systems, but also data that eventually has been extrapolated, or insights that have been calculated with like local edge compute, and so you're enriching the data and you're also contextualizing all of that. And so when you're talking about UNS and models, you need to model that infrastructure, that network of things, right? All the way from sensors, and you need to be clear on the sensor is on a machine, that is on a system, that is on a production line, that is in a factory, that is in a site. And so you definitely have at some point an overlap of the concept of the Purdue network and this layering way of describing the data and UNS at the end of the day, right?
You really want to remove the hardware/machine specifics from the data that's coming. You really want to make sure that any CNC machine just like looks the same. It has always a position, a feed rate, or whatever, like a spindle speed. But you don't want to make it dependent on the year of manufacturing or the vendor. This is like the idea behind it, that you can really make sure you create scalable data products, which you would also do in a Purdue model, but you would do that by removing information a lot. And the UNS says, okay, I give a lot more guidance about how the data structure could also look for a lower level, and then just don't trash or like condense information anymore, because it's not technically needed to do it like that.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me, it feels sometimes, and I heard this argument that UNS is good and nice, but that it adds some level of complexity because you're basically putting all things at the same level. And you're also potentially exposing the entire systems to security threats, while in the past you actually had this physical firewalling of the different layers. So how will you answer to that critique about security and complexity of UNS?
I think complexity first. It's really true that there were like super easy problems that you now throw a UNS on top, where actually no UNS was needed. So if you have one data producer and one consumer, and you just push now a message broker in between the two, there's no added value in between that. And UNS only adds that if you increase number of N producers and M consumers, that you really can make sure that you don't need to exponentially scale the connections in between them. And this is really true. You need to make sure that before you do a UNS like blindsided, make sure that actually is needed in your requirements. But on the data security one, I would say it's actually different. So like it actually follows like best practices, like a demilitarized zone. By normally when you want to have like production level access to data, you need to have access to the machine or the producing asset which provides this process information. And now with the UNS, you just get the data from the machine and push it to the UNS, where you can now interface your application to. So the application needs to access the machine and just now needs to access the UNS, which can be on a different network level, and therefore makes it way more robust. So connectivity through data and not through access.
Yeah, interesting. Definitely interesting perspective. That makes sense. And that actually also remove the complexity of having to deal with permissions of every single operator from the IT perspective. And that was one of the toughest discussions between OT and IT, where it was about, hey, I need to first onboard that operator onto my IT infrastructure, but why? And then suddenly I need to understand what is what and start giving permissions to every single of these OT people onto my visualization tool that is hosted in the
Yeah.
cloud and accesses databases, where eventually you have data from the CRM, the ERP, and so on that you want operators
Yeah.
to access to or don't need to, right? So
Yeah.
interesting. But so is it fair to say that UNS seems to be the modern path forward for manufacturing? Because you were saying that there's more and more data, and now we have the backend that is able to ingest and finally do something out of that data. Do you think that this is a normal path forward, and do you think it's going to be a smooth transition with integration points, or a total switch from one world of ISA-95 to UNS?
I think it's rather evolution. So you're just removing the technical boundaries of a classical software Purdue model and removing it pushing it to an event-driven architecture, which will be in waves. So for example, in the first wave, you just consume information from the Purdue model and make it accessible via that, and don't directly integrate MES to ERP via the UNS. Yeah? So that you have it in waves. So rather third-party applications, then next step is to have like level 4 to level 5 systems in there, and then going down the automation stack, which then also gets more critical and harder to do that further down the road. And I would say it's definitely the only logical way forward, because if you look at IT, like large scale applications are already running on event-driven architectures. If it's called UNS, time will tell, but this is the way how you handle data transfer in distributed systems. So I 100% believe in that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, UNS is very dependent on the underlying protocol, right? It's mostly the implementations, at least, are based on MQTT today. And yeah, I confirm that the pub sub model is being more and more popular in the cloud as well, or in between, because of this ability to exchange data and information, at will, rather than having to go, push everything into a big database and then just surf through that database with the cost and time that it takes, right?
I think the MQTT discussion, Jeremy, also my co-founder, released a lot of videos on that. I think this is also a little bit I really like the protocol, and it's really good in use case, but a lot of people currently blindfolded to just say MQTT equals UNS. But if you really take a step back on that, where was MQTT designed for? Like handling a lot of clients, so millions of devices, which have like irregular and low volume data throughput. And handle that quite low overhead. Looking at manufacturing, you have 150 PLC per site, which have a stable internet connection via wire transmission. Is it really needed to have MQTT in there? I really like MQTT as an interface, an API layer, but is there a broker needed? Is TBD, in my opinion.
Okay.
So it's really in pro and con, and also not saying Kafka is not a solution. I'm just saying like this is a more like, it really depends on your use case. If you have a lot of AGVs and scales which communicate via Wi-Fi, MQTT. If you have one DCS system,
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And actually, that's why I talked about the actual implementation of UNS are mostly dependent on MQTT. But yeah, I'm curious to see what the future holds, because maybe someone will come up with, hey, the use of another or a combination of protocols that makes sense for implementing UNS in a distributed manner that works for everyone. So that's something I'm looking forward to see appear. So what does the future of MES looks like from your perspective in that context? Do you think it's going to be like full on UNS implementation and it's going to transpire everywhere? And are these tools that are already deployed to manage equipment that has been there for some time and is still going to be here for some time? How are they going to evolve from your perspective?
So MES was also in or like experience always like a bucket. It's not a clearly defined product, but it's rather a bucket of use cases that manufacturer might have. And if you now need a software to do something in manufacturing, it's often just MES, and it could be everything from like creating KPIs, planning and scheduling, quality management, also pushing back information to the PLCs for setting up them. It's always MES, MES, MES. And in our opinion, it will be more precise on what you would like to do. Like if it's a core MES functionality about planning and scheduling, it's perhaps an application rather than the MES. And the same goes for quality. The same goes for integration with ERP data now, or like setting up machines. So in our opinion, MES is one system that attaches to the UNS and has some really specific use cases, but it could also be distributed across 3 to 4 vendors, one for planning, one for quality, one for maintenance. And I think it would be way more nuanced than it's now. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what about the IoT platforms? Because we've seen a lot of push for IoT
Mhm.
platforms to start connecting and managing assets, broadly.
Mhm.
And the idea at the beginning, like 10 years ago, was to say, hey, we're going to have these IoT gateways eventually that will connect legacy field
Yeah.
buses or existing infrastructure in the manufacturing sites. And then they will push everything in the cloud, we'll do analytics, and we'll expose that to the business and so on. And
Mhm.
now we're pushing things down to the edge again in a good way, as in,
Yep.
you're going to model, you're going to have communication down there. And IoT platforms are kind of like trying to find their way into manufacturing again, because it's no longer about having the cloud-based IoT platform managing everything and knowing everything and securing everything, or is it? I mean, there's still this
Yep.
device and asset management part of the story you need to have at some point, right?
Yeah. So I think in IoT it makes a lot of sense if you have like a remote device which you need not only be visualize data but also manage the device itself. There you have like good platforms. But in our opinion, like the industrial IoT platforms which were in place were mostly focusing on the use case creation in a low code environment. So like they had also some device management in there, but it was rather not good on an OT sense of things. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say this is actually a place where open source already ran circles around those industrial IoT platforms. For example, Grafana. They don't monetize at all in manufacturing, but at a de facto standard on visualizing shop floor information, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So growing, and this is already slotted into the category minus database, etc. But yeah, I would say the future of IoT, the IoT platform was a thing that you would ask a system integrator and management consultant in 2017. What is the one remaining building block I need? I would say now it's more nuanced. It was a little bit remorse on a lot of buying decisions on that,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's rather a Grafana, for example, to do the job. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. We're full circle here because we're coming back to the notion of open source establishing itself as an industry standard because it's the
Yeah.
right tool, because it's the right way of doing it, and people are adopting it for that reason, and they are able to work on it as a community as well because it's open source.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it's like a lot of things shaped. MQTT is the same. Yeah, it was just put into place. It was Docker was just put into place as a logical consequence, and no, because you have a lot of deep pocketed players in manufacturing who try to shape the narrative, but open source is immune to that and can actually come ahead winning because of sheer distribution and ease of use and
yeah,
actually implementing feedback. Yeah.
yeah. Is it? Once again, I think I mentioned that earlier on, but OT is more traditional, more conservative, as
Mhm.
by culture and by trade. Do you think, and the adoption of open source is something that I've heard and witnessed is kind of like pushed back against, is like something that in the
Mhm.
OT world they're just like, I'm not going to open source or use open source and integrate something that everyone can eventually hack or whatnot. Do you feel that this culture is changing
Mhm.
with OT becoming more and more about software and more and more about integration with IT?
Mhm. I would say it's not necessary by culture against open source. Like they were like super hesitant to change something if it's not 10x better. As it's a classical industry where the change
Mm.
cost of doing something differently are humongous, and therefore you resist change, yeah, because of security and certification and whatever requirements you might have. But now I would say the IT open source community is 10x on so many fronts, yeah. So look at versioning, like try to version a PLC, good luck, yeah. So there's not something like it. And now you see OT people craving for the already standards in IT, if it's messaging, it's connectivity, it's brokerage, it's databases, it's
Yeah,
GitOps, whatever.
yeah.
And now there's enough pressure to really make a change.
Yeah, and they like 10x, feature or enhancement, but it also has like something that's very stable and has been
Yep.
tested and
Well aged.
that's
Yeah.
mature before even trying to adopt it. Let the other
Yeah.
hit the bugs, and then you adopt it once it's mature, which is the case for lots of the IT technology. Alexander, there was a great conversation, great insights. Where can people learn more? What do they do to
Mhm.
engage with you and your teams, and eventually start working, communicating with you?
Yeah. So as we are like an open source company, we have multiple ways to engage. I think the most obvious one is jump on our Learn platform that really teaches everything from basics in IT, OT, and UNS basics. You can find it there, learn.umage.app, or directly jump in our Discord where you can find like-minded people who just complain or be excited about the same stuff as you are. So feel free to also give it a visit.
Nice. Well, links just appeared, and we'll put them in the description as well. That's awesome. Alexander, thanks a lot for your time, and I hope to see you around and continue some collaboration on this kind of podcast and interesting conversation. I like it.
It was a pleasure.
Hi, have a good one. Hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Bye.